I'd really like to get into that. Does it address also bystanders? Because you mentioned that. Does it address what bystanders should do if they see bullying?
It addresses what anyone in the school community can do. And for instance, I can tell you that some schools actually institute policies where they have an anonymous form of reporting. You know, a place where people maybe can put something in a drop box to say that they've experienced bullying or they've observed someone being bullied. There are also schools that are implementing some online ways in which people can talk about these concerns without necessarily identifying themselves, because as we know, one of the things that keeps bystanders from reporting bullying is the fear that they will become the target of the bully or the bullies by doing so.
What can a parent do if they are worried that either their child is being bullied or a friend of their child is being bullied? What specifically can a parent do for the child? Should they approach the school? What advice would you give the parent?
I think it's really vital that parents take notice and take it seriously. And you know, very often parents give their child advice to, if it's a case of physical bullying, to retaliate against the bully. And this can be harmful because I have heard of several instances where it was actually the victim who retaliated against the bully but then had disciplinary actions placed against them because the retaliation was so severe, or it garnered so much of attention. So I would think talking with your child seriously about what's going on and acknowledging that this is a serious issue rather than brushing it off and telling them that it's a normal part of growing up. That's one important thing to do. The second is to immediately contact the school counselor, if there is a school counselor at that school, or the school principal, to talk, to share your child's perspective of what's going on, and to be assertive about ensuring that something is done to address the situation in the school.
Are teachers now, as they're going through colleges of education and being certified to become teachers, are they made aware of how to deal with bullies and how to be hyper-vigilant about bullying in their classrooms?
Mm-hmm. I think that many teacher education programs do focus on these sorts of issues. I'm not sure that it's something that's done across the board, but I think often in colleges where there is perceived to be an expertise in this area, you know, people are often called in to be give guest lectures and so on.
Let's talk about cyberbullying, because this also has been in the news lately, because everyone was aware of the kind of bullying that could go on day to day in the classroom, in the hallway, in the lunchroom, on the school bus. But cyberbullying is an entirely new ballgame. Describe for us what that is and the kind of damage it does, because it goes on long after you're out of school. You can't escape cyberbullying.
Yeah. You know, when at the start of today's session, when we talked about one of the characteristics of bullying, I mentioned that this concept of repetition is important for a bullying behavior to be identified as a bullying behavior. Well, cyberbullying takes away that need for repetition, because a one-time instance can be spread exponentially all over, you know, to a worldwide audience in some cases.
It's there always.
Yes, and it can never be taken away. So I think the repercussions on the victim or the target are sometimes much more severe than a case of bullying that takes place face-to-face or within a limited environment.
And as little as control as adults do over the world of children and the kind of bullying they do, they have even less control over cyberbullying. Isn't that right?
Yes, because you know, children often don't want their parents to know exactly who they are engaging in conversations with, and so on. And so sometimes parents are not even aware of what the situation is, or just how deeply their child is disturbed by what might be going on. Cyberbullying can take place through a variety of means, you know, through social networking sites such as MySpace or Facebook, through email, through phone messages, mobile phone messages, cell phone messages, or pictures. Now, cell phones also have video capability, so the ability to be caught out in a situation which can come back to haunt you is certainly high.
Yeah, and as you're describing this, I'm realizing that when you send a picture to someone, not just a message, but a picture, and you can send it to multiple people at once, and then they can go and send this photograph. It's worse than even being on a website or being on a MySpace page. Once you send a text message, it can exist, it can go on and on and on and on.
Yes, and this is really the damaging part about cyberbullying, that it can spread so in such a huge manner, and you know, several instances have been discussed in the media where a link between young people taking their own lives and cyberbullying has been made. Now, very often in these instances, the young person who took his or her own life had several other stressors, but a common thread seemed to have been that there was some harassment that took place, whether it was direct bullying or through the internet or cell phones.
How can we even hope to control something like cyberbullying? How can you deal with that?
You know, it's really hard to have policies and sanctions in place that can address all of this. That's why I'm a huge believer in prevention types of initiatives in schools. You know, young people are given this great amount of power at their fingertips. They can reach a worldwide audience with the internet, and often they're given that power without any training regarding the ethics or the ethical use of such forms of technology. So I think talking about these things in schools and in homes is really important.
Let's talk about the damage that can be done by bullying. Because we're not just talking about, we talked about damage of the bystander a little bit, damage of the victim is clear. The bullier also is damaged by this.
Yes.
Explain that a little bit, because I don't think that that is taken into consideration much. There's some statistics that show that people who persist in bullying often end up in prison as adults. I mean, this is a serious sign that a child is really on a seriously wrong path if they're a bully.
Yes, you bring up a good point indeed, because most of us in our interventions focus on the victims rather than the bullies, but there have been some studies that address bullies, and you know, those studies have shown that bullies are often victims of bullying themselves, whether it's in their homes or elsewhere, and that very often this is a learned behavior of a way of interacting with others that they've learned. Some studies have also shown a link between depression and engaging in bullying behaviors. So, you know, definitely interventions that address bullies are important. The other thing is that very often the bully and the victim roles can be interchangeable, as in someone was originally a bully and then you know, becomes a victim, or was originally a victim and then decides that they are going to now be in a position of power and actually engage in bullying behaviors.
So there might be a real fine line then between the bully and the bullier. I mean, there might even be similar characteristics,
right,
similar kinds of traits.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about the power of the bystander, because I think that people forget, and one thing that I remember talking to my daughter very seriously about is the power of a bystander and what a bystander can do to thwart a bullying situation, to prevent it, and that if just one child speaks up, it often gives other children the courage to speak up. So talk a little bit about the power of the bystander and how parents and teachers and educators can kind of, I kind of hope that that's something they do in terms of prevention, is that they just let kids know that the bystander can really learn how to control a bullying situation.